This is an example video for how to work your daily grammar practice sentences. This is a sentence that is not for an assignment. This is just an example that I'm going to go through each of the days of the week so that you can see how to complete each day's task. First, let's read our sentence. Edgar Allan Poe laments the loss of his wife Virginia in his poem Annabel Lee. The first day's task is to complete the parts of speech. So you can go about this either way. You can just go through word by word if you're fairly familiar with parts of speech and you can label as you go. Or if you aren't as familiar with parts of speech, you might want to go through and label what you know first and then figure out the rest from there. So I already did this once and had to erase it, so pardon my scribbles around the words. Let's just go through and look for nouns. Edgar Allan Poe is one name, so it is a proper noun. Let's see, anything else that's a person, place, thing, or idea. Loss is a thing. Wife and her name, Virginia, is a proper noun. A poem is a thing, and the title of the poem is a proper noun. So we have quite a few items in the sentence that are just nouns. Then the easiest thing for me to do is to go from nouns to verbs. Edgar Allan Poe, what does he do? He laments. So this is an action verb. He can actually do that as an action, and the S tells us that it's in present tense. Now, we have an article. A, N, and the are your articles. And then we have of his and in his. We know that his is a pronoun that is replacing Edgar Allan Poe, so it's a third person pronoun, and because it's his instead of he, we know that it's possessive. His wife, his poem. So third possessive pronoun. Now we have of and in. Both of these are prepositions. Now let's give our sentence a final check. Laments the loss of his wife, Virginia, in the poem Annabel Lee. And our first day's task is done. We've labeled each word of the sentence for parts of speech. Parts of speech. Our second day's task is to identify sentence parts. So here we have the same sentence, blank, and instead of identifying nouns, verbs, prepositions, and so on, we're identifying sentence parts. So do we have subjects, verbs, direct objects, positives, that sort of thing. So the first thing we need to decide is what is our subject? Who or what is the sentence about? And that is Edgar Allan Poe. So this is our subject. Then what does he do? He laments. This is our verb, and we need to check because it is an action verb, does it have a direct object? So Edgar Allan Poe laments. We look this way, who or what, you don't have to put this, I'm putting it just so you know what I'm looking for. He laments loss. So loss is your direct object. Then we need to mark any phrases we might have. We noted up here that we have two prepositions, so we have two prepositional phrases. Of his wife, I put that too early, that's actually includes Virginia in that. Of his wife, Virginia, and in his poem Annabel Lee. Both of those are prepositional phrase. So we want to have the is an article, so that doesn't have a sentence part. So we need to decide what this phrase is doing. When we have a word that renames another word, that is called an appositive. APP is our abbreviation. So we're going to do that for his wife Virginia is renaming and poem Annabel Lee. So I'm going to draw a line because it's two words. That is an appositive. So now we have to decide. We have prep phrase, that's what this is, and a prep phrase here. But what is the purpose of this prepositional phrase? So of his wife Virginia tells us more about the loss. Okay, so this whole phrase is further describing loss, which we said up here was a noun. So a word that describes a noun is an adjective. So this is going to be an adjective prepositional phrase. This, in his poem Annabel Lee, tells us where he laments. So a word or phrase that further describes a verb is an adverb phrase. So we have an adjective prepositional phrase to further describe loss, and an adverb prepositional phrase to further describe laments. And that is the end of our sentence parts discussion. On the next task, we need to talk about clauses and sentence type. So in this day, we just said we have one subject, we have one verb, and we know that a sentence with one subject and one verb is a simple sentence, which means we can bracket off the entire thing as an independent clause. And that day's task is done. The next task, we want to look at punctuation and capitalization. Probably the first punctuation capitalization rule you learned was capitalize your name. So we need to capitalize Edgar Allan Poe. Then we have the name Virginia, and we also have the poem title, Annabel Lee. So we have quite a few capital letters here. We need to add a period at the end of the sentence. And we have one more punctuation issue, and that is in the title of the poem. We need to add some quotation marks. Oops, I put that in the wrong place. Your quotation marks are actually going to be on the outside of the period there. So we have names, titles, and quotation marks and a period. And that's all we have to do for that day. Our final day gets a little interesting. We need to diagram this sentence. Sentence diagramming, it actually works well for a mathematically minded person, which is why I like it, because everything has its place. Our subject goes here. We're going to put Edgar Allan Poe. And what does our subject do? We said up here, Edgar Allan Poe laments. So we need to put laments here as our verb. Edgar Allan Poe laments what or whom? Up here we said laments, there it is, loss. Now, we need to find our other word parts. We have two prepositional phrases. We said right here that one is an adjective and one is an adverb. So let's put our adverb phrase. Edgar Allan Poe laments. Where does he lament? In poem. And then we're going to add the poem title, because it was just in a positive to rename our word poem. And then we can't forget this little word, his, tells us whose poem. In his poem, Annabel Lee. We're going to do the same thing with loss. Loss of wife, and then give the wife's name, Virginia. And we can't forget whose wife, his. And then do we have any other words? Edgar Allan Poe laments the loss. So the tells us, it further sets apart loss. What loss? The loss. It's not a loss of many things. It's the loss, this particular one. So the loss of his wife Virginia in his poem, Annabel Lee. Now, I know that this can be somewhat intimidating if you aren't familiar with grammar concepts, but I do want you to note that I just did the entire week's worth of work in about 8.5 minutes, or I'm at 9 minutes now. So it can be done, and each task alone does not take up that much time. I will have posted for you handouts that go over all of the parts of speech and examples, all of the sentence parts and their abbreviations, the different types of sentences, punctuation and capitalization rules, and some template diagramming examples so that you can see, okay, if I have a sentence that's subject, verb, direct, object, then I have subject, full line, verb, half line, direct object. This will get easier as we go along, so please give it your very best try each time, and all of these words will become more and more familiar to you, and we can start playing around with placement of different sentence parts and talk about the purpose of these sentence parts being where they are. The daily grammar practice for your first week will be a simple sentence. So I've already given you 1 week. You've got simple sentence, independent clause, and we will get a little bit more complicated as we move forward. But I just want you to get comfortable with this system and with really analyzing one sentence in many different ways instead of learning each thing in isolation. If you have questions about this, please contact me. Take a picture of your drawing, send me an audio recording of you explaining what's going on. Just please get in touch with me and I can help you move forward.